Good day and welcome back to the Industrial Revolution and all of its movements. There's a part one to this series and we started talking about the history of the Industrial Revolution, how it starts in England, why it started in England, how it spread to different parts of the world. Part two, we're going to continue on by starting with transportation and finishing off the history of the first Industrial Revolution. So let's start off with transportation and the development of steam engines. So early water power involved mills built over fast-moving streams in rivers, but the problem with that is that rivers could be far removed from other cities and towns. They might not have enough power, and they are prone to drying out in a drought. So in 1769, a Scotsman named James Watt improved Newcomen's steam engine to power the machinery. Now, by 1800, these steam engines were replacing water wheels as sources of power for factories. Factories can now be relocated near raw materials, workers, and even ports. And cities are going to begin to grow around the factories that are built near central England's coal and iron mines. For example, you're going to see bigger cities being involved, such as Manchester and Liverpool, expanding practically overnight. So with increased production, you are searching for more markets in order to buy your products, and you're searching for markets of raw materials. And therefore, you need better and faster means of transportation to move goods and raw materials to and from. And before the Industrial Revolution, perhaps you might see canal barges being pulled by mules, or ships that are powered by sails, or even horse-drawn wagons, carts, and carriages on not very trustworthy roads. But after the Industrial Revolution, you're going to see trains and steamships, and even into the early 1900s, trolleys and automobiles that would increase the movement of transportation. So let's look at the transportation revolution. We're going to start with American Robert Fulton and his steamboat in 1807. This is going to speed up water transportation up and down rivers. And around the same time, Britishmen John McAdam and Thomas Telford are going to make the macadamized roads. These are going to be improved roads, ones that would be better for transporting from carriages and carts, and eventually you're going to be seeing the ideal of the automobile coming along. Also, not too long after that, Englishman George Stephenson starts creating the locomotive, which is a fast land transport of people and goods. And German Gottlieb Daimler is going to start creating the gasoline engine. This is going to lead to the invention of the automobile. Also in Germany, around the same time, in 1892, we moved from the gasoline engine to the diesel engine. Now that's going to be cheaper fuel and is named after Rudolf Diesel. And then finally, Americans Orville and Wilbur Wright invent the airplane in 1903, and this is going to begin the production of air transport. Now, looking back at the steamboats in the early 1800s, Robert Fulton invented the steamboat in 1807. Now, the Claremont operated the first regular steamboat route, running between Albany and New York City. Then in 1819, the Savannah used the steam engine as auxiliary power for the first time when it sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. And by 1836, John Ericsson invented a screw propeller to replace the paddle wheels, and by 1838, the Great Western, first ship to sail across the Atlantic on steam power alone, completed the trip in 15 days. And here is a picture of the Great Western. So when we look at the macadamized roads, they're strong, hard roads invented by John McAdam and Thomas Telford. They are an improvement over the original dirt and gravel roads that everyone had made before. The macadamized roads have a smooth, hard surface that supports heavy loads without requiring a very thick roadbed. Now, modern roads are macadamized roads with tar that is being added to limit the creation of dust. And so you can see the foundations of our modern roadway system here with the very first macadamized road. course, roads are not enough to move for transport, so in 1830 you're going to see Stephenson's rocket train that travels the 40 miles between Liverpool and Manchester in 1.5 hours. And then, of course, once that starts, railroads are going to be in fashion for the rest of the century. From 1830 to 1870, railroad tracks went from 49 miles to over 15,000 miles in England alone. Steel rails are eventually going to replace the original iron rails, and in 1869, Westinghouse's air brake made train travel safer. That makes also for greater train traveling comfort. You could have heavier train cars, improved road beds, and even sleeping cars for long transport. However, here is your first railroad system, known fondly as the rocket. We also have a communications revolution in our Industrial Revolution. For example, the American Samuel F.B. Morse creates the telegraph in 1844, and this is going to give you rapid communication across the continents. Now, Alexander Graham Bell is going to come across with the telephone in 1876, and for the first time in the United States, human speech can be heard across the continent. Around the same time, American Cyrus W. Field is going to create the Atlantic Cable around 1866, and for the first time, the United States and Europe is connected by a telegraphing cable. Now, of course, that went underneath the ocean. There could be problems involved with that, so we had to make a better improvement. So Guglielmo Marconi, an Italian, made the wireless telegraph, an early form of the radio, in 1895. No longer would wires be needed for sending messages. And in 1907, American Lee DeForest creates the radio tube, in which radio broadcasts could be sent around the world. And by 1925, American Vladimir Zorkin is going to create television, that is a simultaneous audio and visual broadcast. So now that we've gone through the first part of the Industrial Revolution, you're going to notice European cities are now going through a period of urbanization, mostly because of the factory system. You need workers to work in your factories. They don't want to live far away, so you're going to see the cities just explode in population. Unfortunately, this is going to cause living conditions to be terrible in several sections of these cities. Sickness would become widespread, especially with the idea of dirty water and cholera. So the average worker would spend 14 hours a day working, and they would have 6-day work weeks, usually having Sunday off. And of course, a lot of times you would have dangerous accidents in factories. The most dangerous industry would happen to be the coal mines. And of course, as you see in factories in the 1800s and even much into the 1900s, you didn't have to be an adult in order to work in these dangerous factory settings. In fact, children were encouraged to work in some of the most dangerous parts of the factories. Now, because of the haves and have-nots in the factory system, you would see class tension. There's a lot of new money being made from factory owners, shippers, and merchants who are becoming upper middle class. You're going to see them becoming doctors and lawyers, and then maybe even lower factory overseers of the actual workers in the factory. However, that is not the majority of the population. Most of the majority of your city population would be the working class. And a lot of times, machines would even replace these working class laborers. But hey, there are some good things that come along with the Industrial Revolution. After all, they are going to create new jobs. As new inventions come along, somebody's got to learn how to process them, somebody's got to learn how to work with them. It also is going to create more demand, therefore more goods are being sold, and therefore a lot of money is exchanging hands. This increased production of goods is going to create more jobs and more money. There's always a hope of improvement as we're watching all of these inventions be created. It also expands educational opportunities. You do need to have an educated worker who understands how to use your machines. Now, it's going to take a while for everybody, but eventually conditions are also going to improve in the workplace as the machinery and then eventually workers' growth does improve. So as industrialization begins to spread, as you're looking at England being spread to the continent and then of course to colonies that later become their own countries. We see a spinning machine being built from memory in the U.S. by a man by the name of Samuel Slater. And then Francis Lowell is going to mechanize every stage of manufactured cloth in the U.S. So you're going to see women flocking to mill jobs in the United States. And the United States then is going to go through their own industrialization period in the late 1800s. With the raw materials and resources that are in the United States at this time, with new inventions coming out of the United States at this time, there's going to be a swelling population in their cities as well. And of course, with the railroad system being able to be built very quickly across the length of the continent of the United States, railroads are going to play a major role in spreading machinery, spreading goods, and spreading populations far and wide across the continental U.S. Now, as your factories become more popular and as they're becoming richer, owners are going to start creating corporations. Entrepreneurs will sell shares of stock or rights of ownership in these factories. And these businesses, as they become corporations, will give the ability to raise large amounts of capital. For example, you'll see in the United States Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel spreading their factories and spreading their raw material production across the United States. And in Europe, you are going to see William Cockerell make his way to Belgium, and his son is going to build large industries there. Germany also is going to have pockets of industry. They're going to import British engineers, begin to build their railways there, and as we heard from before, transportation is going to be one of their biggest industrial improvements. There's also going to be other regions in Europe that are going to begin to industrialize in certain methods and parts of the Industrial Revolution. For example, northern Italy is going to become quite famous for their textile industries. However, social structure and geography are actually going to halt it elsewhere. You're not going to see a lot of the Industrial Revolution, say, for example, go off into Russia or other small kingdoms where their communities just are not on the grid when it comes to transportation, or perhaps their leaders, their kingdoms are just going to say no. What is the impact then as some communities and some countries say yes while others say no to the Industrial Revolution? Well, the industrialized countries are going to exploit overseas markets for their resources. And we're going to see now imperialism being born. This is going to give European industrialized nations great power. It's going to develop a middle class for them in their countries. And it's also going to start creating a movement for social reform for the workers in their European countries. Now, as we get into the idea of how much is too much or not enough with the Industrial Revolution, what is good about industrial revolutions, and what perhaps could have still been improved, you're also going to have philosophers looking at the idea of business and industry. For example, you have Adam Smith, who believes in the term laissez-faire. And that is the policy of letting the owner of the industry and business set the working conditions without interference. He wrote about this in The Wealth of Nations, where he's saying if there is a large demand of goods, you're going to have a large demand of workers. These workers are then going to want to come in and work as hard as they can in order to get ahead and get better pay. The ideal of capitalism is also going to come along. Now, capitalism is an economic system in which the factors of production are privately owned, and money is invested in business ventures to make a profit. Now, Malthus is going to come along and write an essay on the principle of population, where he tells you that the epidemics of a growing population and perhaps even wars are necessary in order to stimulate production and in order to create more capitalism. Ricardo is also going to write that there should be a permanent underclass in the principles of political economy and taxation. You are always going to have an upper class who are going to be the overseers and the capitalists, and you're going to have a majority of the underclass who will always be working in the factories. Jeremy Bentham is also going to write about utilitarianism, in which people should judge things based on their usefulness. Individuals should be free to pursue interests without interference from the state, and he's going to question unregulated capitalism. So unlike Adam Smith, he's going to think you need to have some regulations. There needs to be some set of ground rules so you don't have a monopoly happening. You don't have just one owner owning and controlling a business, so prices get way too high or raw materials are used up too quickly. And he pushes for reforms, especially when it comes to workers. Now, you're also going to see the beginnings of utopian leaders like Robert Owen, who are going to improve working conditions and attempting to create utopias with industry. For example, Robert Owen is going to attempt to do this in the state of Indiana in the United States. However, you're also going to see French reformers looking into the idea of utopianism and social reform as well. People such as Charles Fourier and Saint-Simon, and they come up with the idea of socialism, where the factors of production are owned by the public, and they're being operated for the welfare of all, not just for the overseers, but especially for the workers in the factories. Other philosophers might be Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, for example, with their Communist Manifesto, where they tell you that the middle class haves, or the bourgeoisie, are going to be the ones who are in the lead, but the majority of the people in the factories are going to be what they call the have-nots, the workers or the proletariats. And Karl Marx is going to predict that workers would eventually overthrow the owners, and when they did so, this would become his Communist Manifesto. Now, Marx believed that factories would drive small businesses out, leaving a number of manufacturers to control all the wealth. Now, this is going to lead the proletariat to revolt, and a classless society would then develop, and he called it communism. And at this point, all of the goods should be shared equally amongst everybody. So when we look at social reforms, workers are going to eventually form together in the late 1800s and in the early 1900s in order to form unions. Now, they're engaged in bargaining with employers, and if refused, these workers could strike. And in 1824, you're going to see Britain Combination Acts that are going to outlaw unions, but they become repealed in 1824. And in 1886, the U.S. American Federation of Labor is going to start leading their first successful strikes. Now, the Factory Act of 1833 would make it illegal to hire children under the age of 9 in Great Britain. They would also state that you could not work more than 8 hours a day. And in 1842, the Mines Act prevented women and children from working underground. And by 1847, it would even limit the workday in England to 10 hours. Now, William Wilberforce was influential in getting the slave movement to end in Great Britain in 1833. By 1865, the slavery movement was ended in the U.S. In 1873, it was done in Puerto Rico. And by 1888, Brazil would end their slavery. Now, women activists would meet at an International Council for Women in 1888, and Horace Mann, an American, would advocate for free public education. Alexis de Tocqueville also is seeking to reform conditions while he was in prison. So with all of these different reform movements happening across the continents, across the European continent and across the United States, you do start seeing more people starting to act social reform, trying to make things better, improved for the workers. Thank you so much for stopping by to learn about the Industrial Revolution, not only from its transportation and philosophical sides, but also in part one, where we learn a bit about the history and about the specific industries themselves. If you'd like to learn more about the Industrial Revolution, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what I've missed. And as always, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. Thanks for stopping by.